More than 24 administration officials have denied and are denying authoring that op-ed. President Trump saying the Justice Department should launch an investigation into who wrote it. The president saying it's a national security matter. Joining us now, Associate Professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, Gloria Brown-Marshall, former Clinton chief speechwriter, author, and president of Brennan Center for Justice, Michael Waldman, host of Woke AF on SiriusXM, Danielle Moody-Mills, and Republican strategist Evan Siegfried. So, should the vice president question his staff directly, Gloria? Should he do that? He says he understands who they are and everything should be okay.
Well, if he wants to have confidence in their actual answers and their truthfulness, then he should ask them the question unless he's fearful of the answer. The emperor has no clothes. The people within the administration say they are fully clothed. We, the American people, need to know.
We need to know is what you're saying. So I have to ask you this, though, Michael. Since you're the master of words on this group here, we'll say that, right? We'll all put our hands up to that, right, and defer to you here. Who wrote that? Who do you think wrote that?
Well, one question, of course, is how senior was the person?
That's right.
Journalists will sometimes call someone senior who the rest of us might not think is so senior.
Right.
But the bigger question is, it came right after the leak of the Bob Woodward book, which had dozens of very senior people saying exactly the same thing. And at this point, the question, to me at least, is not so much who wrote it, and it's a fun parlor game, but what are folks in Congress and what are voters going to do about it?
So in all those words, since you're a wordsmith, what did stand out in the words in that op-ed?
Well,
not to put pressure on you, but I'm a little pressure on you.
There's one word, for example, lodestar, which a lot of Google searching found that Mike Pence uses, and I'm sure he broke into a cold sweat when they figured that one out. And apparently he never has had the nerve to actually ask his staff because he has such confidence. But who knows?
Well, he knows. The vice president actually mentioned the word lodestar. This is how he defended that very question. Let's listen.
One of the claims made in the op-ed is that there'd been discussion of invoking the 25th Amendment to even remove the president from office. Have you ever been part of a conversation about that?
No, never. And why would we be?
Now, that was actually his statement on the 25th Amendment, and he also in this saying that's another list of what they did not talk about and have not talked about. Danielle, your thought about this discussion? We've now, in just a short amount of time, brought up a lot of different words, one of it being the 25th Amendment.
The one word that I would like to constantly talk about is the word unfit, which everyone is very aware that this president is incredibly unfit. So whether it is an anonymous op-ed that's written, whether it is the umpteenth book that has come out on him, what we should be investigating is whether or not the claims of him being unfit, unhinged, are actually true. And get some psychology testing, get some medical testing to tell us whether or not the person that is sitting with their finger on the button, and not just the Twitter button, but the actual one that could end all worlds, is fit to serve. And the reality is he's not. And whether or not we find out and we distract ourselves with, the whodunit of the political moment, the reality is that he is a danger and he's the national security threat, not the person that's trying to wave a flag about what's happening in this White House.
And Danielle, that is if everything that has been written in the op-ed and everything that we understand to be in Bob Woodward's book is true. But is it true? And often you will see a retort coming from the White House and the administration here, Evan. And we really haven't seen, if you will, a mechanical, forensic deconstruction of the claims made in either of these two recent publications.
Well, first of all, when it comes to this op-ed and the words being used, you have to remember that Trump officials have told Axios on repeated occasions that whenever they give blind quotes and they're leaking about something, they borrow the language and verbiage of other Trump officials to throw people off the scent, because this White House is unbelievably paranoid, and the paranoia starts at the top, especially when it comes to leaking. But when it comes to the veracity of it and being able to push back on it, the White House was caught unprepared by the Woodward book, even though they knew it was coming. They didn't even have a copy for 6-7 hours, and they didn't put out a statement in reaction to the excerpts being released on Tuesday for that same length of time. But it's been a big problem for them. But with this op-ed writer, I think they made a grave mistake, twofold. First, as Ben Sass said, when you have a president whom they say is paranoid and prone to rage fits and making impulsive decisions, Why are you going to feed that paranoia? And second, it feeds the base of the Republican Party who is saying that there is this deep state against Trump. It just confirmed everything. And now you have prominent Trump surrogates who aren't exactly prone to pushing conspiracy theories, like Matt Schlapp saying that the Omarosa book, the Kavanaugh hearings, the Woodward book, the op-ed, and other things that have happened in the past several weeks are part of a massive conspiracy. I know Twitter banned Alex Jones, but it seems Matt Schlapp and others are taking up his mantle.
And please, Gloria, do comment on that. Plus, we have the issues and the claims of treason, right, as well as threats to national security.
Well, treason in the Constitution is giving aid to the enemy, and this is not treason. This is someone who's a disgruntled employer who's upset with his employees who have revealed his weaknesses that we already know. And these are schisms within the Republican administration, Republican Party. So if there is some paranoia about the outside and deep state, it's the deep state within the Republican administration. It's not the Democrats doing this. So if there's a book on what is obvious, and we didn't even need this op-ed. We already saw that he was unhinged and he was unfit. But it's a Republican within his administration stating that that is the case on a day-to-day basis.
So is that a good response then, Gloria, that it is treason, that it is a threat to national security? It sounds like you don't agree with that.
Well, there have been over 700 psychiatrists, not psychologists, psychiatrists, who have observed his behavior and said that he was unfit, that he's a narcissist, that he has all of these paranoid delusions. So it's not as though people have not said this before.
That violated the canon of ethics. If you're a doctor, you can't diagnose someone without direct examination. So we shouldn't be considering that because that's against medical ethics.
And I do think that this idea that the 25th Amendment might be invoked, that to me is fan fiction for frustrated progressives. That was there for when a president is in a coma or has medically diagnosed dementia or something like that. That's not for when you have, as president, a reality TV show star prone to fits of anger. That's who the electoral system chose.
I disagree. I disagree. John Ferrick, who actually is the last living person who actually wrote the 25th Amendment, was interviewed by me, and he said it did include psychological issues as well as medical ones. So I would disagree that the 25th Amendment is off the table. I do think that it would be very difficult to do anything in triggering the 25th.
We're going to have to leave it there, though.
He thinks he's Napoleon, that's the problem, but he thinks he's president, and that's the real problem.
So here we are, the encapsulation of the great debate that is ongoing right now. Gloria Brown-Marshall, thank you so much for being here today. Of course, Michael Daniel and Evan, they're going to be with us right after a short break. George Papadopoulos claims members of the Trump campaign knew about his efforts to set up a meeting with Russians. Who knew about that? And what this means for Robert Mueller's collusion investigation. Former Trump campaign aide George Papadopoulos is heading to prison for 2 weeks for lying to federal investigators. Along with his sentencing, he has been slapped with a $9,500 fine, 200 hours of community service, and a year of supervised release. Now, this morning, in his first live interview since his sentencing, Papadopoulos spoke about how his case fits into the bigger picture of the Mueller investigation. Take a listen.
Do you think when the entire Mueller investigation is finished, that they will demonstrate that there was collusion between the Trump campaign, between Trump advisors, and the Russians?
You know what, George? I have no idea. All I can say is that my testimony might have helped move something towards that, but I have no idea.
All right, joining the panel, Karen DeSoto, defense attorney and former prosecutor. We also have Evan McMullen, former CIA operative and 2016 independent presidential candidate, joining the table. So, Karen, that might be, some might say, one of the understatements of the year, or 2 years, or 5 years, or a decade here, if he were to be that patient zero, that seedling that started this whole investigation. That's right. We saw the article come out a week or two ago, right, where his lawyers were trying to get leniency for his sentencing. Now we actually hear from him saying this very thing. It seems like when I sat there in front of Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump that they were kind of in favor of my suggestion. And he's saying that in interviews right now. What does that mean for Sessions?
Well, first of all, Sessions obviously gave testimony and has been asked by multiple journalists. So this seems to be a little bit of a controversy here. What was it? Did Jeff Sessions just not remember this conversation at the meeting? But obviously, this is a pretty big, little bit of a bombshell in the sense that
he says
Jeff
they're
Sessions
fully
testified.
aware.
That they testified twice. Now, what was his understanding of the meeting? Obviously, he's going to listen. Some explaining needs to be done, right? What was his understanding of that question? Maybe he will say there might have been a meeting. We talked about lots of things. We talked about Russia and Korea and talking to all of these people. So obviously, we don't know what the context was, but this is definitely a bombshell. This seems to be in direct opposite of what he's already said.
Evan, if you're sitting in the room, regardless of what side of the aisle you might have been on, and you hear that, hey, by the way, I'm about to set up a meeting with Vladimir Putin. What would your reaction be in this context with Russians?
I mean, it's a clear, obvious no, and certainly any presidential campaign that even has half a clue about what it's doing would reject that out of hand, okay? But really, this idea of a meeting, there's nothing illegal about a U.S. presidential candidate meeting with even someone like Vladimir Putin. It's a terribly bad idea politically, but that's not illegal. And I know there's a lot of focus on that, but what I think is more interesting, actually, is
what happens in the meeting?
What happens in the meeting, but even more importantly for Papadopoulos, did Papadopoulos tell the Trump campaign that the Russians had dirt on Hillary Clinton that they had stolen? That's the critical issue. Now, Papadopoulos says, interestingly, and I don't think credibly, but the special counsel probably knows much better, that he doesn't recall telling the campaign that he had heard this from this Professor Mifsud, this man in Malta who is associated with Russian intelligence. So that's very peculiar to me, that Papadopoulos is out bragging about this at a bar to an Australian diplomat and claims to have told yet another diplomat, but at the same time says, even as he was seeking the campaign's approval, that he didn't tell the campaign. I find that very hard to believe and very unlikely.
Well, whether or not it was credible, too. That was what was interesting. Oh, after I talked to him, I asked him to contact other people, but I didn't really find him to be credible. So that's interesting because it's half one way and half the other.
Well, let me add to the detail that has been talked about so far in the last 2.5 minutes. You're talking about that professor, Joseph Mifsud, now considered a missing link. Where is the professor potentially here? And again, part of that link between the Trump campaign and these potential discussions with Russians may have died, might be missing now, just to add another layer to the story here. And so the question is, as this goes forward from Mueller, what does this all mean for his case? And what are we seeing in terms of the progress of his case, you think?
Well, I think all of the questions have already been asked. I think, obviously, he's on TV, which he did a very good job with this interview, I thought, for his first time appearing on TV.
Was that coaching?
Well, you know what? This is what struck me with the whole thing. He actually goes into detail how the FBI came up to him when he was at the airport and he was trying to put his passport into a machine, and then they put the badge in his face.
Right.
So I think the viewers have to understand that he's going to jail for 14 days for lying. And one of the things that strike me, both as a defense attorney and a prosecutor, is how willing people are to talk to FBI agents when they just walk up to them or knock on their door. And this is the perfect example that, please, go talk to your attorney first.
Danielle, what are you hearing on your show in terms of as the world turns, shall we say, in this very case?
You know, I constantly hear from my callers. They call in from all over the country, and the reality is they're like, when you are a dog and you lie down, you wake up with fleas, right? These are the groups of people that he is around. We have this whole mystery whodunit in so many different areas of this administration because they're criminals, right? Their behavior is criminal. You would not have to ask all of these questions and have all of this follow-up if they were transparent. There's a reason why they're not transparent about the relationships that they have, the meetings that they go on, who's in them, who's privy to them, because they know that they're doing something wrong. And that is the pattern that we have learned over the course of these many, many, many months that make me feel like I am 116 years old, because every day it is another lie. It is something that they left out, something that they forgot. Oh, I forgot I didn't have this kind of clearance to talk to this person. No, you didn't. You're just covering up your tracks. That's what they do. That's what criminals do when they're trying to hide bad behavior.
Evan?
I think that the one thing everybody's missing...
Not Evan, sorry.
Yes. There's Evan 1 and Evan 2.
Yes,
the one thing that everybody's missing in this is I think the White House is relieved that George Papadopoulos is coming out, and that's becoming a center of attention, considering the week they just had, in that they've already gone over George Papadopoulos. And it's so nuanced that a lot of people have tuned it out, and they're just saying, you know what, something happened, I can't keep up with all the details, it's coming at us at a frenetic pace, and this is actually something the White House and Sarah Huckabee Sanders, they're happy to be talking about. They don't want to be talking about the op-ed. They don't want to be talking about Woodward. And they don't want to be talking about how Randy Credico just went and testified before a grand jury, and it looks like Roger Stone might be indicted in the next month or so.
Richard, if I could just jump in here and just say one last thing
quickly,
about Papadopoulos. So Papadopoulos says, in response to questioning this morning, you know, I'm not sure if this will result in collusion or conspiracy charges against Trump, but I probably helped things move in that direction. But then he also says, I don't remember telling the campaign about the Russians having dirt on Hillary Clinton. So my question is then, what did he say to investigators that would lead him to believe that he pushed things closer to conspiracy? What other piece of information does he have?
And 15 seconds, and then I'm going to get killed in the air here.
Well, I thought that this was this was some obviously information that we haven't heard about. We're going to digest it. We're going to ask more questions, and I'm sure that Mueller is going to have a lot more questions for a lot of people that were on the peripheral that now will come center stage. Will it take us closer to ending it, or will it take us closer to this investigation continuing and continuing?
One thing I know is going to take us closer to break. Karen DeSoto, thank you so much for stopping by. We appreciate that. Everybody else, stick around, please. It's a tale of two presidents on the campaign trail today, Donald Trump and Barack Obama. You've seen it. The difference in their messages and how voters might respond. We'll take a look.
In 2 months, we have a chance to restore some sanity in our politics. We have the chance to flip the House of Representatives and make sure there are real checks and balances in Washington.
Well, 57 days until the midterm general elections and 3 more primaries just coming up this week, by the way. And all sides are bringing out their big guns. You saw there this weekend, former President Barack Obama, after a year and a half away, hitting the campaign trail, sharply criticizing the policies, directly criticizing the policies of President Trump and Republicans. It wasn't clear if Trump was watching or sleeping, something he said he did during Obama's previous speech. But he is tweeting today, quoting former Republican Congressman Jason Chaffetz. Quote, Barack Obama talked a lot about hope. Donald Trump delivered the American dream. All the economic indicators, what's happening overseas. Donald Trump has proven to be far more successful than Barack Obama. Well, Trump and Obama each have several more campaign appearances scheduled between now and the November midterms. Still unclear which president will help his party more. Let's bring our panel back. Okay, so who will help their party more, Evan M.?
Donald Trump or Barack Obama? Well, look, I'll say this about the midterms. I think the best thing the Republicans have going for them is the state of our economy, which is thriving. And look, I'm okay, even as somebody who's very opposed to President Trump, saying that he and the Republicans have contributed to that. The recovery was on its way before this administration. It's continued during the administration. Fine. The thing is that the electorate has already priced that into the midterms. And the president remains incredibly unpopular. I mean, you'd really have to work to have an approval rating at about 40% with an economy that's thriving the way it is now. And so what that means is that any other bad news that comes for the Republicans or the president, then is that there's only downward opportunity here, and not upside.
So that's kind of looking at old school politics. My pocketbook's better today. Right? But Danielle, we have this other X factor this round, this last 2 or 3 years, all said when we hit the midterms, of all of these headlines, the op-ed this week, the Bob Woodward book, and as well as all of the other headlines related to misogyny and such related to this Republican Party right now.
18 lawsuits, the sexual assault cases.
Would that overweight the pocketbook is my question.
What I think is going to happen, and I said this before, what's going to drive people to the polls is outrage. People are outraged. When Barack Obama stands up for over an hour at the University of Illinois and is talking about sanity and civility and hope and all of these things, he's reminding the American people what a leader, what your president is supposed to to sound like. It's supposed to act like, and the dignity that is supposed to come with that office. And I think that it was a stark contrast that he had that we haven't seen, because this has become our new normal.
Right.
Twitter and meltdowns have become our new normal in how presidents are supposed to act. So I think that this is the midterms will be a rebuff of him.
And certainly the cadence and his language is different, and it is opposite of his current president. But Evan, all the way down there, there is whether the youth vote will be enacted and brought to the polls, right? And that's what the former president was saying. Hey, where's the youth vote? You got to get out there.
Well, I think the president is a little Johnny-come-lately overall, the former President Obama, because the anger that Danielle was referring to, it's the most abundant renewable energy source on the planet, and it's being renewed at record rates right now, and we've seen it play out before. When it comes to the youth vote and millennials, who the oldest ones are 37%, only 1 in 5 identify with the Republican Party.
That's a new study, your quote.
Yeah, so I've been studying this for years, and we're seeing voter registrations across the country. The Minnesota Secretary of State released on Friday the new voter registration numbers for 2018. It was 57,000 Minnesotans. Of those, 68% were under the age of 30. And then we're seeing it again in Pennsylvania. Young Democrats in Pennsylvania now outnumber young Republicans by 400,000. In Pennsylvania, again, the new registrations for 2018, 2/3 of which under the age of 30.
Right.
And when Pew Research did a study of millennials saying, will they turn out compared to other generations? Because there's the trope that the youth don't vote. Well, 62% of millennials are saying that they are looking forward to this election, and that's a 16-point increase from the last midterm election of 2014. It's going to happen, and people are missing this.
Evan M., pick any one of those numbers that you'd like here that Evan S. was just putting out there. But the Senate. Will it, in various states across the country, real clear politics, looking at 9 toss-up seats right now, 5 held by Democrats, 4 by Republicans at the moment. Ted Cruz is a great example. There in Texas. Tennessee is another good example.
Yeah, you know, look, there's tremendous energy on the left. There's no denying it. You see Beto O'Rourke out there campaigning, gaining traction against an established Republican senator who ran for president, who had a chance at winning the nomination, and he's gained national attention because his message is resonating. You know, the Senate's in play. I think it's very hard
in red states.
In red states, I think it's still very difficult, though, for Democrats in the Senate, but it is not impossible. It is not impossible, and the Republicans have a lot to worry about. But I think it's increasingly likely now. We see that the general ballot in the House is headed. At least the Democrats have a 14-point advantage in the House on a generic ballot, meaning most Americans at a 14-point advantage would rather see the House in the Democrats' hand than the Republicans. I mean, in the House, it's a little more sure, but in the Senate, it's difficult.
Well, the former President Barack Obama now out on the road. Perhaps we'll see Evan McMullin, a former presidential candidate, also hit the road now. We'll see in the last 57 days. Evan, thanks for sticking around. I appreciate it. Everyone else, we'll see you right after the break. And still ahead for all of you, Fear and Loathing, Bob Woodward's book about what's really going on inside the White House, now set for its official release this week. What the fallout tells us about the people running the country.
You know, I'm very open to you. I think you've always been fair, but we'll see what happens.
And it's, you know, it's a tough look at the world and your administration and you.
Right. Well, I assume that means it's going to be a negative book, but, you know, I'm sort of 50% used to that. That's all right. Some are good and some are bad. Sounds like this is going to be a bad one.
President Trump is bracing for another White House tell-all book, this time coming from veteran investigative journalist Bob Woodward. Following the release of scathing excerpts from Woodward's new book, Fear, President Trump apparently no longer believes Woodward is fair. He's now calling the book a work of fiction.
It means nothing. It's a work of fiction. If you look back at Woodward's past, he had the same problem with other presidents. He likes to get publicity, sell some books. The book is a work of fiction.
Woodward's much-anticipated book officially arrives Tuesday. Joining us now to discuss the tell-all book and how it will impact the White House, we have Mark Updegrove, presidential historian, president and CEO of the LBJ Foundation, and former director of the LBJ Presidential Library, Michael Waldman, president of the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University, and a former chief speechwriter for President Bill Clinton is back. Danielle and Evan also back with us. So, Mark, let's start with you, new to the panel here. What do you make of the excerpts so far from Woodward's book about to officially come out on Tuesday? And if the president actually rejects these excerpts, this is different. This is an investigative journalist that actually has notes, that has recordings.
You know, this is different this time, as you point out, because this is Bob Woodward. Bob Woodward has amassed a certain credibility in his time as a journalist, going back to Watergate, of course, but since then has come up with a number of books that have themselves made headlines. He's never really been called into question. In fact, Jill Abramson, the former editor of the New York Times, wrote in a piece for the Washington Post that Woodward is truth's gold standard. He is a reporter's reporter, and he bases his conclusions on fact, on accounts from the individuals in the White House. So this is a little different than Michael Wolff's book.
You know, I'll pull from page 331 where it details in the book, that one of the excerpts we have, about how they had gone through some practice here with his counsel at the time, Dowd, and it turned out to be disastrous. This is what happened in this practice session. Basically, John Dowd saying, hey, you're just not a good witness. Michael, this is just the beginning of what might be more revelations, because when Woodward gets out onto the interview circuit, as we saw with Omarosa, who knows what other details might come out?
Well, and this is a several hundred-page book, and as has been said, Woodward's facts stand up. People might agree or disagree with some of his judgments.
As my producer says, he's got receipts.
He's got receipts and some scalps of other presidents to prove it. And I think that at a certain point, the kind of whodunit, the drama of the release, I hope will get overshadowed a little bit by some of the revelations, such as President Trump's lawyer saying that if he testified before Robert Mueller, he would end up, quote, in an orange jumpsuit, meaning he'd be in prison because he'd be lying. There's a real scandal unfolding here, and we still have seen no action really from Congress to look into it. And this is where it plays into this election. It is true that it's a strong economy. Normally, that would mean the party in power would not suffer so many losses. It'll be an interesting question of whether the revelations overwhelm people's calm about the economy.
Yeah, one of the other excerpts, page 109, in the excerpts that we have, Gary Cohn reported, and you know this, Danielle, because you've been reading through this over the last recent days, snatching a draft letter that was ending the U.S.-South Korea trade deal that President Trump never signed. And there's actually a copy of the letter in there. You know, what more, and I'll put the same question to you, might come out, because we know Woodward now has to follow Omarosa Manigault-Newman, who I think rewrote the standard of introducing a new book.
Yes.
Shall we say?
Yes, shall we say. I think that the difference, I mean, there's a big difference between her book and his book. One, because she's just a celebrity. She just wants the salacious celebrity-ness of whatever is going to promote her into the next show. Woodward, we know, is a journalist. Like, he has the most integrity, utmost integrity. The reality is, to your point, we should be investigating what people are saying. Is it true? Where is Congress? Why is this not terrifying to them that there are staffers that are running around taking papers off of the president's desk because they're terrified of what he's going to do? Like, why is that not something that should be alerting us and saying, Congress, this is something that you should investigate. This isn't just hearsay anymore.
30 seconds to you.
Well, I think that the book itself reveals a dysfunctional president, and it all trickles down from the top. He's somebody who contradicts himself. The things that we've heard so far that really disturb me, his willingness to publicly belittle generals, after his first time that he went to Dover Air Force Base in the initial days of his presidency to see the return of remains of a fallen U.S. soldier, he told his aides, never send me to one of those again or a military funeral. We see that Jared Ivanka will freelance and undercut things such as DACA. We see, I think, a huge portrait, and I think there are going to be some figures who are controversial who will come out very well, like Gary Cohn and Rob Porter.
Mark Updegrove, what happens on Tuesday when this tome comes out and Americans get to read this on that day if they like?
You know, I don't know what else we have in the books. The revelations that have come out to this point are very concerning. You essentially have the president's staff saving the president from himself. That's just not something that we've seen in the White House before. We haven't seen aides taking actions in order to mitigate what might otherwise be a crisis. This is something very different, and I do believe that Congress needs to take a very serious look at this president and what needs to be done in order to keep him contained.
Do you think that they're ready this time around after what happened with, again, Omarosa's book?
Well, I think you have there's a 1-2 punch last week. There's the Woodward book, and we have yet to see what is in the balance of that book, although what has been revealed to this point is very disturbing. But you also have the anonymous piece in the New York Times that show not only the staff essentially forming a shadow government at the White House, but also questioning the president's morality. I mean, these are extremely disturbing developments.
All right, Mark Updegrove, Michael Waldman, Daniel Moody Mills, and Evan Siegfried. A real charged discussion we had on the Sunday. Thank you all four. All right, this week, investigative journalist Bob Woodward joins NBC News and MSNBC for his first live interviews that we're just talking about. This happening for the first time since the release of his new book, Fear Trump in the White House. Tomorrow morning on NBC, Woodward gives his first live interview to Savannah Guthrie on Today. Don't miss that. Then
I've seen other men call other umpires several things, and I'm here fighting for women's rights and for women's equality and for all kinds of stuff. And for me to say thief and for him to take a game, it made me feel like it was a sexist remark. I mean, like how he's never took a game from a man because they said thief. For me, it blows my mind.
All right, Serena Williams there calling out, saying sexism and double standards in tennis. This after her loss in Saturday's U.S. Open final, where she got into a heated argument with umpire Carlos Ramos. It all started when Ramos gave Williams a code violation warning after he ruled her coach was instructing her from the stands, something her coach admits but Williams denies. That was followed up with a point penalty for smashing her racket, and then a game penalty for calling Ramos a thief following their confrontation.
Owe me an apology. You will never, ever, ever be on another court of mine as long as you live. When are you going to give me my apology? You owe me an apology. Say it. Say you're sorry.
Announced today, just today, the U.S. Tennis Association announced it is fining the 23-time Grand Slam champion $17,000 for those violations in her loss to Japan's Naomi Osaka. Let's bring in now Tyler Tynes, SB Nation writer, and Kavitha Davidson, a sports writer. Kavitha, is this an issue of gender inequality? Was it sexism when you look at the data out there in terms of the way she was treated, how she's been fined now today, and then how other players, such as Novak Djokovic, which is now spreading through the Twitter sphere about, well, look at what he's done during games?
I think it's definitely a question of sexism. The fine, not necessarily, but the threshold for what was deemed verbal abuse, I think, was much lower for Serena than what we've seen, as you said, from Djokovic, what we've seen from Rafa Nadal with this particular umpire as well. And I think one of the issues is that throughout sports, there's a notion that umpires, officials, referees, they're at their best when you don't remember their names. And the fact that we're going to remember Carlos Ramos's name for the history of tennis is really damaging.
What's the standard that you're alluding to in terms of severity of language?
She didn't use any curse words, first of all. I think that has to be there. She didn't threaten him or anything. She really just wanted an apology. And she took issue with the idea, the implication that she was cheating by being coached from the box, which is something that is unspoken, that is done throughout tennis, that, you know, her coach pointed out that Rafa Nadal's coach has done it, Osaka's coach has done it, everyone kind of does this. So the idea that was the first penalty really set her off, and she was understandably upset about it.
Tennis legend Billie Jean King, Tyler, you know well, as well as Kavitha here. She put out a couple of tweets defending Serena against what has happened so far. Let me read what she says. Several things went wrong, very wrong, during the U.S. Open women's finals today. Coaching on every point should be allowed. allowed in tennis. It isn't, and as a result, a player was penalized for the actions of her coach. This should not happen. When a woman is emotional, she's hysterical, and she's penalized for it. When a man does the same, he's outspoken, and there are no repercussions. Tyler, what do you think?
So I think we can take it a step further here, too, in that the feminist scholar Moya Bailey would describe what happened to Serena Williams as misogynoir, a combination of race and gender both being involved to show the bias of a male apparatus against a black woman. And it's specifically here, not only just the fact that there's a difference here between the man and woman dynamic, but it's a black woman that her experience and what she's going through is being erased, on top of the fact that we're policing the black athlete's body and policing exactly how they're supposed to emote. Serena Williams is the greatest tennis player to ever live. And so the fact that she can't show emotion as she's losing a game is ridiculous, and it's ludicrous. Djokovic has done the exact same thing to this umpire, and he's received no penalty. Nick Kyrgios, the same thing. Andy Murray, Nadal. Numerous male athletes have done the exact same thing to this umpire, and they haven't even been penalized and rarely get a warning. And so it's fairly clear what's going on here when it comes to Serena Williams.
You know, another example, I'll throw this to you, Kavitha. Frances Alice Cornet, you remember she received a code violation. It was then reversed when she had put on her shirt backwards, right? And so she, on the court, took it off, and she was wearing a sports bra and put it back on. And she complained, as well as others, saying, hey, look, there are many male players that take off their shirt altogether, and why can't she do it too?
Well, exactly. I mean, it's a complete double standard, and also goes.
Well, what's the status of tennis? I'm sorry, the USTA and the standards and the culture of the very sport.
Well, it goes back to very Victorian notions that tennis is still very embroiled in about modesty, and those are specifically applied to women in ways that they're not applied to men, frankly.
Yeah.
This idea that the woman athlete is supposed to be demure and that champions don't get heated in the heat of the moment. Obviously, Serena Williams is a very emotional person. She's very soft-spoken when she's doing her press conferences, but in the middle of a game, you know, it's understandable that the emotions will take over an athlete, and that's actually what makes her a champion.
You know, Tyler, first of all, the U.S. Open in New York is certainly a different animal than maybe the French Open as well as Wimbledon. But as you know, during the French Open, they said no more cat suits. And this is not only because of Serena Williams, it's also because of other players who have also worn cat suits in the past. What is wrong with cat suits?
I mean, nothing.
Or bodysuits, whatever you want to call them. Yeah.
Nothing's wrong with the bodysuit. Yeah. And the thing here is that Serena Williams is using that because it's better for her health. It was Wakanda inspired. It was an ode not only to try to save her own life because of the blood clot she's had, but also, you know, rejuvenating her own black womanhood and her own black experience. The reality is that tennis does not deserve Serena Williams because for what she's standing for now, every time she steps on the court, her body is an act of dissent. What she's doing is a protest. Every serve is upsetting the status quo. And because of that, her black womanhood is something that is more powerful, and what she's fighting for when it comes to gender equality is more important than maybe even winning another Grand Slam at this point. It is disparaging, and it's depressing to see that Serena Williams had to beg to play tennis. She had to beg to play tennis. That's not what millions of people should have to experience. But again, it's an implicit bias that's being used against Serena Williams, and it's racism, and it's very clear.
20 seconds to you, Kavitha. Who's going to win out here?
Serena's going to win out, obviously. I mean, the public is behind her. I think that tennis has to realize that they need Serena more than she needs the sport, frankly. And she, as Tyler said, is much bigger than tennis is. So she absolutely comes out the winner here. And honestly, we have to also mention Naomi Osaka because she was also actually the winner as well.
The winner, the first Japanese player to ever win a Grand Slam. So a lot of winners as well, but we have one controversy that we're talking about today. Thank you both. Tyler Tynes, Kavitha Davidson, great conversation, and we'll be right back. And that does it for me. I'm Richard Louie, in for Yasmin Vasugian. Up next, Ayman Mohideen. Hey, Ayman.
Hey, Richard. Thank you very much. A very busy hour, everyone. I'm Ayman Mohideen at MSNBC World Headquarters, and we certainly have a lot to break down. The White House whodunit over the New York Times op-ed has an already paranoid president now questioning whether he can trust anybody who works for his administration. What could possibly go wrong with that? It's Trump versus Obama on the campaign trail. Could the reemergence of the former occupant of the White House do more to energize the Republican base than the Democratic one? And the Grand Slam controversy, Serena Williams accusing an umpire of sexism after getting penalized on